Jim Jordan walked into the committee hearing, expecting another routine session where his signature smirk and combative demeanor would take center stage. But things took an unexpected turn the moment Jasmine Crockett opened that manila folder and started reading from internal memos. In the next 7 minutes, the hearing room would fall silent, and a hidden pattern of procedural manipulation would be exposed, one that had gone unchallenged for far too long. The House Oversight Committee hearing room carried a palpable weight, every inch infused with the authority of institutional power. The mahogany panels, though dark and imposing, absorbed the harsh fluorescent lighting above, casting faint shadows across the faces of the committee members and witnesses. The hum of the air conditioning filled the space, just loud enough to create a constant presence without interrupting the seriousness of the proceedings. The scent of polished wood and paper lingered in the air, setting the stage for a session that would not be as predictable as many had assumed. Every cough, every rustle of papers, and every whispered conversation was captured by the sensitive microphones, their red recording lights a constant reminder that all words spoken would become a part of the public record. From his elevated position, at the head of the committee, Chairman Jordan exuded the confidence that had become synonymous with his political persona. His shirt sleeves were neatly rolled up to the elbow, and his gold tie hung loosely around his neck, signaling his self-styled image of a political warrior unchained from the constraints of Washington's formalities. The characteristic half-smile played at the corners of his lips as he shuffled through his prepared talking points, occasionally exchanging knowing glances with his allies across the room. Across from him, Representative Crockett sat with a quiet but formidable composure. Her posture, though poised, was not one of arrogance. It was the steady readiness of someone fully prepared. Her crimson blazer stood out in sharp contrast to the sea of navy and gray suits, its structure emphasizing a sense of controlled confidence. When she turned her head to consult her notes, small gold earrings caught the light, while a lapel pin in the shape of a balanced scale subtly hinted at her background as a civil rights attorney. Her eyes remained sharp, missing no detail as she methodically arranged the documents before her. Though her expression was neutral, the careful precision with which she prepared herself for the hearing reflected the quiet intensity with which she approached her work. The committee members, the staff, and the press all settled into what they assumed would be yet another partisan clash, unaware they were about to witness a pivotal moment that would be replayed on news outlets across the country. Jasmine Crockett never anticipated becoming the focal point of the hearing. Her journey to Congress had begun in Texas courtrooms, where she fought tirelessly to represent clients whose voices had been overlooked by powerful systems. Today, she brought that same relentless pursuit of justice to the halls of the House. As she prepared to speak, a brief memory flickered through her mind, one of her earlier days in the courtroom when she was up against a judge who dismissed her argument with a condescending smile. But she had countered with such meticulous legal reasoning that she forced a ruling in her favor. The lesson she took from that experience was simple: preparation overcomes prejudice. And today, the system she faced was more intricate, woven, with political games, media manipulation, and a stark divide in how Americans saw truth and facts. The hearing, called to investigate allegations of political interference within government agencies, had a much deeper agenda: to create sensational headlines and video clips that would quickly make the rounds on conservative social media. Against her stood a powerful coalition, a committee that valued partisan loyalty over objective truth, a conservative press eager to amplify every criticism, and a public increasingly skeptical of politicians like her. Yet she remained steadfast in her commitment to justice. Before the session began, she'd spent the morning reviewing the case with a cup of unsweetened coffee by her side. "Are you ready for today?" a colleague had asked as she passed by. With a slight smile, she responded, "Always," masking the tiny knot of nerves that had yet to leave her before any high-stakes confrontation. Like many women in power, she knew her every move would be scrutinized, not just for what she said, but for how she said it, how she looked, and even how she stood. As the hearing began, it didn't take long for her to recognize the familiar dynamics. Chairman Jordan, with his dismissive tone, began subtly undermining her expertise, questioning her knowledge of the details. She remained composed, refusing to take the bait. When he tried to suggest that she wasn't familiar with the matter at hand, she countered with a question that not only demonstrated her understanding but exposed the oversight he'd conveniently ignored. Every time he tried to belittle her, she responded with factual precision, each answer building upon the last, forcing the narrative to shift in her favor. The tension rose incrementally. Jordan's interruptions became more frequent as he sought to sidetrack her questioning, but Crockett remained calm, even as he attempted to question the relevance of her inquiries. "I'm simply following the questioning pattern you've established," she replied, refusing to be rushed. Then came the pivotal moment. When Jordan made a factually incorrect statement about a key document, a hush fell over the room. Crockett could have easily let it slide, but she knew that silence would only let the distortion stand. She gently asked for a clarification, requesting that he point out the exact page in the report where he had referenced the information. Jordan's response was vague, attempting to downplay the discrepancy, but Crockett, with methodical calm, produced 5 separate sources that contradicted his claim. One by one, she presented them: the official report, sworn testimony, official correspondence, a court ruling, and even Jordan's own statement from a press conference months earlier. She passed copies to the committee clerks, ensuring every member had a set. As she did, she explained, "This isn't about partisanship, it's about facts. And when we're chairing a hearing of this magnitude, we must be committed to accuracy." Jordan's expression shifted, and for a moment, the room was filled with palpable tension. Crockett continued, "For the record, I'd like to make it clear that the chairman's previous statement contradicts the available evidence unless, of course, the chairman would like to retract it." The dismissive smirk on Jordan's face began to falter as the reality of the situation set in. "The gentlewoman is twisting my words," he muttered, attempting to regain control. But Crockett was unwavering. She concluded with a simple but profound remark. "Perhaps it's important to remember that the dignity of this institution isn't measured by the volume of our voices, but by the accuracy with which we present facts, even when they contradict the narrative we'd like to believe." With that, the room shifted. The chairman, his smirk now gone, attempted to regain his footing by invoking procedural decorum. But the moment had already passed. As he continued, a moderate committee member surprised everyone by offering his time to Crockett, allowing her to continue her questioning. The dynamics of the committee had shifted, not through force but through the power of truth. In the days that followed, that exchange spread across social media, going viral. News anchors dissected the moment, analyzing its significance. The phrase, "the truth doesn't need your smirk," quickly entered the lexicon of political commentary. But it resonated far beyond politics. It became a symbol of speaking truth to power, of ensuring that facts, not dismissive confidence, shape the narrative. For Crockett, the moment wasn't about personal victory. It was about a commitment to integrity. "This isn't about me or any party. It's about the importance of truth in democracy," she said in a statement after the hearing, and while the moment brought both support and criticism, it marked a turning point in how such confrontations would unfold. Across the country, professionals and ordinary citizens alike saw in that moment a reflection of their own experiences, a validation of their own struggles with authority figures who dismissed their expertise with a smirk. For many women in particular, Crockett's stand was a powerful reminder that they too could challenge dismissiveness with calm confidence, armed with facts and clarity. That moment, though brief, offered a lesson that extended beyond the halls of Congress. When facing dismissive authority, the most powerful response isn't more smirking, more confrontation, but more preparation, more precision, and more facts. And in a world where style often overshadows substance, it was a reminder that in the end, truth has the power to outshine any performative confidence. The House Oversight Committee hearing room, with its dimmed mahogany panels, bore the silent weight of institutional authority. The air was thick with the promise of conflict, a tension that had been building long before Chairman Jim Jordan took his seat at the helm. His presence was commanding, almost theatrical in its delivery. The crisp blue of his shirt sleeves, meticulously rolled up to the elbow, contrasted with the loosely hanging gold tie that framed his neck. It was the exact kind of calculated disarray he had come to embody, an image of the political outsider unafraid of breaking convention. His half-smirk, a signature trait honed over years of public appearances, flitted across his lips as he scanned through his notes, clearly preparing for the verbal duel he expected to unfold. To him, this hearing was nothing more than another well-practiced routine, a series of questions he had asked countless times before, a game of political chess where he controlled the board and the narrative. The glint in his eyes suggested that despite the evident tension in the room, he felt entirely at ease, his confidence unshaken by the looming confrontation. But across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat with an entirely different kind of poise. Where Jordan's energy was dynamic, restless, and brimming with combative bravado, Crockett exuded a quiet intensity that was just as commanding, if not more so. Her presence alone commanded respect. The sharply cut lines of her crimson blazer stood in sharp contrast to the sea of conservative blues and grays, marking her not only as an individual, but as someone with a distinct purpose in the room. The blazer, structured and professional, conveyed more than just fashion. It was a symbol of the strength she had cultivated over years of advocating for the voiceless, fighting tirelessly in courtrooms across Texas. Her gold earrings glinted in the light, catching the eye at intervals as she turned her head slightly to consult her meticulously organized notes, each sheet of paper carefully aligned, each source cited, each reference made to ensure that no stone was left unturned. Her posture, poised and unyielding, exuded an air of quiet readiness, her every movement deliberate and thoughtful. There was no rush to her actions, no frantic scrambling to assert dominance. Crockett understood the power of preparation, of waiting for the right moment to speak, to challenge, and to shift the entire dynamic of the room. It was a stark contrast to the usual chaos of such committee hearings, where tempers often flared, and the force of personality could tip the balance in favor of one side or the other. But there was something else that marked Crockett's presence. It wasn't just her appearance, though the crimson blazer and the gold pin, symbolizing her work as a civil rights attorney, stood as quiet reminders of her experience. It was her eyes. There was a depth to them, a focus that spoke to years of honing the skill of listening, of observing every detail in the room. Her eyes missed nothing, cataloging every gesture, every word spoken by the chairman or any committee member. It was a characteristic she had honed in courtrooms where the smallest detail could be the difference between winning and losing. She had learned the art of patience, of listening to every word spoken, to the nuances, the small betrayals in language that would reveal more than any formal testimony could. Every tiny action, every glance exchanged between committee members, every sharp interruption was a signal to her. She was already processing the moment, mapping out her responses, ensuring that when her turn came she would be ready. Not just to speak, but to speak with the weight of facts, with precision, with the unassailable truth. Her approach was methodical, not born from any sense of arrogance, but from a quiet conviction rooted in her belief in justice. Crockett had been in rooms like this before, but never quite like this, never with an adversary so polished in his aggression, so skilled at dominating the narrative through sheer force of personality. But Crockett knew better than to let himself dominate the stage with rhetoric. She understood that her strength didn't lie in outshouting her opponent or matching him in his bravado. No, her strength lay in the facts, the irrefutable, meticulously gathered evidence that could shift the entire conversation. She knew the system she was up against all too well, a system built on power, prestige, and partisan loyalty, a system that often dismissed the voices of the marginalized, of those like her, who had spent years on the other side of the justice system fighting for those with no voice. This hearing was more than just a political game for her. It was an opportunity to take the fight to a different stage, one where facts and precision could triumph over bravado and bluster. As she sat there, waiting for her turn to speak, she recalled her earlier days in court, those moments when judges, lawyers, and even juries had dismissed her arguments with a glance, a smirk, a dismissive comment. It wasn't the first time she had seen that look, the look that told her that her voice didn't matter. She remembered the times in the Texas courts when the judge had leaned back in his chair and asked, with the same condescension she now saw in Jordan's smile, "You think that argument will persuade anyone?" It was a question born not from ignorance, but from a deep-seated belief in his own authority. But Crockett, in those moments, had not been intimidated. She had learned early in her career that the system was designed to crush the voices of those who dared challenge it. But that didn't stop her. It made her more determined. She had fought back with nothing but reason, with the kind of legal precision that couldn't be ignored. And in those moments, the judge was forced to listen. The lesson was clear. Preparation was her weapon. It was the one thing that no one could take away from her. She had faced that dismissiveness countless times before, and now, sitting in the committee room, it was familiar once again. But this time, she was ready. This time, she would not let Jordan's smirk, his interruptions, or his condescending questions derail her. The battle was no longer about words or arguments. It was about the truth, the kind of truth that couldn't be erased with a dismissive gesture or a sharp retort. It was the kind of truth that, once spoken, would shift the entire power dynamic in the room. As the hearing moved forward, the tension in the room began to build. It was subtle at first, a shift in the rhythm of the proceedings that only the most attuned could feel. Chairman Jim Jordan, who had started the session with the air of a man completely in control, began to show signs of discomfort. The interruptions, once casual and dismissive, grew more frequent. Every time Representative Jasmine Crockett spoke, he countered, sometimes with a sarcastic remark, other times with an attempt to assert his dominance through procedural questioning. But Crockett, unfazed, kept her composure. Her voice was calm, steady, even when he attempted to challenge her in ways that were designed to provoke, to test her patience. She knew exactly what was at stake in this room, not just her credibility but the integrity of the system they were supposed to be upholding. She had spent years in the trenches of the courtroom, fighting against institutionalized power, defending those who had no one else to speak for them. In those years, she had learned that the most powerful tool in any battle was not the loudest voice, but the quietest strength, the ability to remain calm, to refuse to be drawn into the trap of emotional escalation. And she knew, from years of experience, that there was nothing more dangerous to someone who relied on dismissiveness and aggression than calm precision. Every time Jordan interrupted, every time he belittled her expertise or dismissed her questions as irrelevant, Crockett responded with an even sharper focus and even more methodical approach. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she understood that her opponent, though experienced in these types of hearings, was underestimating her resolve. It became clear to everyone in the room that Crockett was no rookie in the game of political confrontation. Her questions, though simple on the surface, were deeply layered, designed not just to probe the witness or the chairman, but to expose the cracks in the narrative they were trying to create. Each question she posed was a calculated move. Each answer she provided a counterpoint that forced the committee to reframe their assumptions. She wasn't just questioning facts. She was questioning the way those facts were being manipulated, spun, and presented to fit a particular agenda. And yet, Chairman Jordan continued to push, his interruptions becoming more pointed as he sensed that Crockett was beginning to shift the room's focus. He attempted to use the time constraints of the hearing to pressure her, suggesting that she be more concise, a tactic he knew well, one designed to disrupt a person's rhythm and derail their train of thought. But Crockett, unfazed, calmly, responded, "Mr. Chairman, I'm following the same line of questioning you established earlier. I simply ask for the same respect afforded to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle." There was no rush in her voice, no anger, no irritation, just a firm, quiet insistence on fairness. She knew the game they were playing. She knew the way it was designed to make her appear either too emotional, too aggressive, or too unprepared to handle the heat of a high-stakes political debate. But Crockett was smarter than that. She was playing by a different set of rules based on facts, preparation, and the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing the truth. As the back and forth continued, Crockett's questioning began to take on a more pointed edge. She asked questions that were simple on their face but deeply complex in their implications. She wasn't just asking for clarification. She was exposing the contradictions in Jordan's rhetoric, in the very way the committee was framing the hearing. Every question she asked had a purpose: to highlight the flaws in the narrative, to shine a light on the inconsistencies, to show that there was more to the story than the simple political talking points Jordan and his allies were trying to push. The room's atmosphere grew heavier as the exchanges intensified. The audience, a mix of staff, journalists, and political observers, could sense that something significant was happening, something that would not be so easily dismissed. The cameras rolled, and the microphones picked up every word, every nuance. But it was the unspoken tension that began to speak volumes. And then the moment came. Jordan made a mistake, a critical one. In his attempt to silence Crockett, he made a factually incorrect statement about a key document, one that he believed no one would challenge. He smiled, confidently looking at his colleagues as if expecting them to back him up, to let his inaccurate claim stand without question. But Crockett, with a calmness that sent a chill through the room, leaned forward and asked the question that would shift the balance of power in the room. "Mr. Chairman, may I ask just one clarifying question?" Her voice was quiet, almost respectful, but there was an undercurrent of something far more powerful, an invitation to correction, a challenge to the authority that had been wielded so recklessly. "Could you kindly point to exactly which page of the report contains the statement you just cited?" she asked, her tone still composed, her expression neutral. The room held its breath. The challenge was gentle, but its implications were profound. Jordan, caught off guard, tried to dismiss the question with an offhand remark, "It's somewhere in the report." But Crockett wasn't having it. With deliberate calm, she held up the document she had carefully prepared, her eyes meeting his as she pointed to the marked page. "I believe this is the passage you were referring to, Mr. Chairman. However, it seems to contradict the very statement you just made." The room went still. The truth hung in the air, and for a moment time seemed to stretch. Everyone knew this was no longer just about the hearing. It was about something much larger. It was about the credibility of the committee, the integrity of the facts, and the moment of clarity that had just shattered the facade. As she continued, her calm, professional demeanor never wavered. She produced more documents, 5 in total, all contradicting the chairman's claims. The official report, sworn testimony, correspondence, court rulings, and even Jordan's own past statements. She passed copies to the committee clerks, ensuring each member had a full set. "The issue, Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice unshakable, "is not about partisanship or politics. It's about factual accuracy. And we have a collective responsibility to ensure that when we chair investigative hearings, we do so with integrity." In those moments, Crockett's quiet precision not only exposed the chairman's inaccuracy, but it also rendered his dismissive tactics ineffective. Jordan's smirk, which had been a constant throughout the hearing, disappeared. The room could feel the shift in energy. What had started as a battle of egos had now become a battle of facts. And in that battle, Crockett had emerged victorious. The room was silent for a moment, but it was a silence filled with anticipation. For the first time in the hearing, it wasn't just the chairman who commanded the room. It was Representative Crockett who, with a quiet yet undeniable force, had shifted the entire dynamic. Her calm response, her methodical presentation of the evidence, had taken the wind out of Jordan's sails. The subtle shift in power was palpable. Crockett had not only demonstrated a mastery of the facts but had also exposed the fragility of the political game that Jordan had so often played. As the chairman tried to regain his composure, his previously unshaken confidence faltered. He, attempted to brush off the moment, but his words lacked the same certainty they had carried before. "We're getting lost in the details," he muttered, trying to reframe the situation. "We should be focused on the bigger picture." But it was too late. The cracks in his narrative had already begun to show, and Crockett, with methodical precision, wasn't about to let him distract the room from the truth. Her response was measured and deliberate. "Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, the details are the picture. The facts, the truth of the matter, cannot be swept aside because they don't fit the narrative we wish to project." She spoke softly, but her words landed like a hammer. The tension in the room was thick. Everyone knew that this wasn't just another partisan clash. It had transcended the usual political theater. This was about truth, and Representative Crockett had made it clear that she would not let that truth be obscured by political posturing. The subtlety of her approach only made it more powerful. She wasn't engaging in the same kind of emotional outbursts that often colored such hearings. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't pointing fingers. She wasn't accusing. She simply presented the facts. She laid out the documents, the testimonies, the undeniable contradictions in Jordan's statements. She didn't need to shout to be heard. Her presence, her calm, unwavering commitment to accuracy, made her the loudest voice in the room. For a moment, Jordan seemed to retreat into himself, a rare sight for someone accustomed to being in control. He was searching for something, anything, that could put him back on top, that could silence the challenge Crockett had presented so methodically. His eyes darted from his notes to the committee members to the journalists in the room. But the confidence was gone. His usual smugness had been replaced with frustration, and it was clear that he was trying to regain his footing. The subtle smile that had lingered throughout the proceedings was now absent, replaced by a thin line of frustration. But Crockett remained calm, her posture unwavering. She wasn't waiting for an apology or a concession from Jordan. She knew that wasn't the point of this moment. It wasn't about humiliating him. It was about ensuring that the facts spoke for themselves. Her silence in that moment, as the room waited for Jordan to respond, was almost deafening. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't pushing. She knew that the more she allowed the silence to linger, the more it would force him, and the committee, members, to reflect on the facts she had presented. The power of that silence was undeniable. It was a strategy she had learned long ago in the courtroom. Sometimes the most effective move is simply to wait, to let the weight of your words and the truth sink in. As Jordan began to speak again, his voice was noticeably less assured. "We can't get bogged down in these minutiae," he said, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "The issue here is bigger than one report." But Crockett was already ready with her response, and this time, her words were laced with the unmistakable tone of someone who had no intention of letting the issue slip away. "Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice steady, "the issue is not one report. The issue is a series of misstatements, contradictions, and half-truths that have been allowed to stand because no one has been willing to challenge them. Today, I'm challenging them. And I believe that's exactly what this committee is here to do, to find the truth, regardless of how uncomfortable that truth might be." The room fell into another stunned silence. This was no longer just a questioning session. It had become a confrontation between Crockett's unwavering commitment to the truth and Jordan's attempts to maintain control over the narrative. And, at this moment, it was clear that Crockett was winning. She had not only challenged the chairman's assertions, but she had done so in a way that made it impossible for him to brush her off. She had presented irrefutable evidence, documents, testimony, facts, and had done so with a quiet professionalism that left no room for argument. Jordan's attempts to regain control continued, but they were growing more desperate, more transparent. "I think we're getting off track," he said, his voice rising slightly in an attempt to reassert dominance. "This hearing is about politicization in government agencies, not about quibbling over reports." But Crockett, ever poised, simply raised an eyebrow. "With all due respect, Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice still calm, "if we are to investigate politicization, we must first ensure that the facts are presented accurately. That's what I'm doing today, ensuring the facts are heard." The truth hung in the air, as tangible as the documents she had laid out before them. It wasn't about partisan politics or personal attacks. It was about making sure that for once the facts were given the weight they deserved. For a brief moment the room seemed to shift. Crockett's unwavering commitment to truth had turned the tables. The power dynamics were no longer in Jordan's favor. They had shifted to her side, to the side of precision, of facts, of accuracy. The audience in the room, committee members, staff, press, were all witnessing something rare. A moment when facts, not rhetoric, had the power to change the course of an entire hearing. And for the first time in the hearing, it seemed that the committee members were beginning to see this shift too. Their eyes darted between Jordan and Crockett, weighing the tension in the room. Some were beginning to speak up, supporting Crockett's calls for factual clarity, questioning the chairman's assertions. It was subtle at first, but it was happening. The ground had shifted beneath Jordan's feet. As the hearing continued, the once dominant presence of Chairman Jim Jordan began to fade into the background, overshadowed by the quiet, undeniable force of Representative Jasmine Crockett. The atmosphere in the room had shifted irreparably. The committee members, who had been anticipating another typical partisan clash, were now confronted with something far more profound. A battle not for political dominance, but for the integrity of truth itself. The shift was subtle, but it was palpable. Crockett's calm precision and her unwavering commitment to accuracy had forced Jordan onto the defensive in ways he had not anticipated. Every move he made to regain control, every attempt to dismiss the documents, to downplay the importance of the contradictions she had exposed, seemed weaker, more desperate. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with a furrowed brow and a tightened jaw. He was no longer the master of the room. Instead, he seemed like a man grasping at straws, hoping for a way to assert authority in a situation where his power had been stripped away, piece by piece, by the relentless force of factual accuracy. Crockett's demeanor remained calm, even as the tension in the room reached a boiling point. Her every action was measured, deliberate, ensuring that her presence was felt without her needing to raise her voice. She wasn't looking for an emotional victory. She wasn't interested in being the loudest or most combative participant in the room. No, her goal was simple, to ensure that the truth, no matter how inconvenient, was given the weight it deserved. And as she stood there, methodically presenting document after document, fact after fact, it became clear to everyone in the room that this hearing had evolved into something much more important than partisan grandstanding. It had become a lesson in the power of truth. As Jordan struggled to regain his footing, he attempted once more to discredit Crockett's line of questioning. He tried to paint her as an obstructionist, someone who was deliberately derailing the hearing with technicalities. "We are here to investigate politicization in government agencies," he said, his voice a little louder now, trying to sound authoritative, not to get bogged down in endless paperwork and minute details. But Crockett, with her trademark poise, was not deterred. She knew exactly what he was doing, trying to deflect the focus away from the facts and onto procedural distractions. "Mr. Chairman," she replied, her tone unwavering, "the issue at hand is not just politicization. The issue is the integrity of the process. If we are to investigate the politicization of government agencies, then we must first ensure that the facts we are using to make those claims are accurate. Otherwise, we are just perpetuating another cycle of misinformation." Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to Jordan's bluster. There was no rhetoric, no grandstanding in her response, just a quiet assertion of the importance of truth. The room, which had once been filled with the noise of partisan bickering, now seemed quieter, more focused. Committee members exchanged glances, unsure of how to proceed. They had been expecting to see a typical partisan battle, but what they were witnessing was something entirely different. Crockett was not just challenging Jordan, she was challenging the very foundation of the hearing itself, the idea that power could control truth, that influence could silence facts. She had, with the weight of her calm and her evidence, turned the tables on the narrative, forcing the committee to confront the uncomfortable reality that they were not just here to debate politics, but to uphold the truth. And in that moment, the truth was louder than any partisan talking point. The tension in the room continued to build, but it was no longer one of conflict. It was one of reflection. Crockett's precision, her reliance on facts over rhetoric, had created a ripple effect. Her unwavering stance on accuracy had forced the room to reconsider the entire premise of the hearing. The power that Jordan had once held in his hands, the ability to control the narrative with his words and his presence, had been neutralized by the quiet force of a single, calm voice, backed by irrefutable evidence. For a moment, it seemed as though Jordan might try to shift the conversation again, but Crockett was one step ahead. She had anticipated his every move, and with each response, she had prepared the ground for his inevitable retreat. This was not just a contest of words. This was a battle of wits, and she was winning. As Jordan's attempts to reassert control became more frantic, Crockett simply moved forward with her questioning, her voice as steady as ever. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "if we are to move forward with this hearing, then we must first address the inconsistencies that have already been presented. These are not minor details. They are the foundation upon which this hearing stands. If we ignore them, we undermine the integrity of the entire process." Each of her words was a calculated step toward dismantling the facade of control that Jordan had so carefully constructed. With each passing moment, it became clearer to everyone in the room that this was no longer about political power. It was about truth, about ensuring that the foundation of the hearing was built on a solid base of verifiable facts. And Crockett, with her calm precision, had made it impossible for anyone to deny the importance of that foundation. Jordan's smirk, which had once been a symbol of his political dominance, had disappeared completely. In its place was a look of frustration, a man caught off guard by an opponent who was not playing by the same rules he had so often used to his advantage. But it wasn't just the chairman who had been rattled. It was the entire room. The committee, members, who had once been ready to follow his lead, were now forced to confront the reality of the situation. They had witnessed the power of truth laid bare, and they could no longer ignore it. At this moment, it became clear that this hearing had evolved into something far greater than just a political spectacle. It had become a lesson in the importance of facts, of accuracy, and of the integrity required to uphold them. Crockett had not only exposed the flaws in Jordan's narrative, but she had shown the committee, through her actions, her words, and her unshakable commitment to truth, that facts were not negotiable. They could not be bent to fit a political agenda. They could not be silenced by a smirk or a dismissive comment. And as the room began to settle into a more reflective silence, it was clear that the hearing had irrevocably changed. The power dynamics had shifted. The truth had won, not through grand speeches or fiery confrontations, but through quiet, methodical precision. Crockett had demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful force in a room is not the loudest voice, but the most accurate one. As the hearing trudged forward, the impact of Representative Jasmine Crockett's interventions continued to reverberate through the room. The initial shockwave of her calm, confident challenge to Chairman Jim Jordan had left its mark on everyone present. It was as if the very air in the room had shifted, as though the temperature had dropped. The weight of her words and the precision of her evidence forcing everyone to take stock of the truth that was now so plainly exposed. What had been anticipated as another partisan spectacle had turned into something far more profound, a public reckoning with the power of facts and the relentless pursuit of truth. For all the bluster, the empty rhetoric, and the smirking displays of power that had characterized the previous moments of the hearing, it had all been undercut by the quiet, methodical force that Crockett had wielded. Her posture had not changed. She remained seated with that calm, unyielding confidence that had been a hallmark of her entire career. But in her eyes there was something different now, a knowing gleam that only comes with the realization that the battle has been won, not through volume, not through confrontation, but through the unassailable weapon of truth. Her response to Jordan's every attempt to deflect or distract had been nothing short of masterful. Each time he tried to turn the conversation away from the damning evidence she had presented, she met him with a level of precision that made his attempts at evasion appear clumsy and unfocused. It was not just a matter of being right. It was a matter of demonstrating for all to see that truth could not be manipulated or twisted. At every turn, Crockett had remained composed, her demeanor cool and steady as she let the weight of her argument do the heavy lifting. She wasn't trying to win the room over with grandstanding or theatrical flourishes. Instead, she simply laid the facts bare, exposing the lies and contradictions with surgical precision. This was a strategy that had served her well throughout her legal career, and it was one that had been especially effective here. It wasn't about having the loudest voice, the most dramatic speech, or the sharpest insults. It was about letting the truth stand for itself, and ensuring that those who sought to obfuscate or mislead could do nothing to stop it. As Chairman Sao, Jordan floundered, his attempts to regain control of the narrative growing more strained with each passing minute. The committee members began to shift in their seats. Their once unshakable loyalty to the chairman and his party's agenda had been eroded, not by forceful argument, but by the quiet power of Crockett's presentation of facts. The members who had once been ready to dismiss her, to silence her, line of questioning now found themselves questioning their own positions. The balance of power had shifted in a way that none of them had anticipated. The more Jordan attempted to brush off the documents, to downplay the significance of the contradictions Crockett had exposed, the more transparent his tactics became. And as his defense grew weaker, Crockett's resolve only strengthened. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to raise her voice or attack her opponents. She simply kept returning to the documents, to the evidence, to the truth. And in doing so, she laid bare not just the falsehoods being propagated, but the very system of power that had been built to protect those falsehoods. This was not just about a political clash between two members of Congress. This was about exposing the mechanisms that allowed such falsehoods to persist. It was about making sure that for once the truth could not be ignored or drowned out by the noise of partisan bickering. The room, once filled with the sounds of heated exchanges and rhetorical flourishes, was now still, save for the occasional murmur of a committee member or the quiet shuffle of papers. The press, once poised to catch every soundbite and headline, seemed to realize that something more significant was unfolding, something that was not just newsworthy because of the personalities involved, but because of the deeper, more meaningful issues at stake. The truth laid out so meticulously by Crockett was not just an accusation. It was a demand for accountability. It was a call for transparency, for a reckoning with the false narratives that had been allowed to stand for so long. And then, as Jordan attempted to regain his composure, the silence in the room was pierced once more by Crockett's voice, steady and unwavering. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her words measured but powerful, "I will not let this hearing be derailed by political games. We are here to get to the truth that has been hidden, the truth that has been manipulated. If we cannot agree on the facts, then we cannot move forward. And if we cannot move forward, then this hearing is nothing more than a charade." Her words landed like a blow, cutting through the last vestiges of Jordan's defense. He opened his mouth to respond, but for the first time during the hearing, he hesitated. The smirk was gone. The swagger had evaporated. And for a moment, he appeared small, diminished, not because of anything Crockett had done to him, but because of the undeniable force of her argument. He had been exposed not through insults or personal attacks, but through the quiet, unyielding power of the truth. The room, once filled with uncertainty and division, was now unified in a single, unspoken realization. The facts were all that mattered. All of the political theater, all of the strategic positioning had been rendered irrelevant by the simple act of laying out the truth. The committee members began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, many of them exchanging furtive glances as they realized the gravity of the moment. Some began to scribble notes. Others simply nodded to themselves as if to say that they too had seen what had happened. The press, once eager for the latest soundbite, had begun to pick up on the significance of what was unfolding. Social media was already abuzz with clips of Crockett's calm but powerful questioning. The phrase "the truth doesn't need your smirk" began to circulate, becoming a rallying cry for those who had grown weary of political gamesmanship and wanted something more, something real. It was not just a catchphrase, it was a statement of intent, a declaration that facts could not and should not be ignored. As the hearing drew to a close, Crockett's final words resonated throughout the room. This is not about any individual. This is about the integrity of our institutions. The truth is all we have, and if we cannot stand by it, then we stand for nothing. It was a reminder to everyone present that the work of governance, the work of democracy, could not be allowed to devolve into a battle of egos or a contest of personalities. It had to be about truth. It had to be about facts. And it had to be about holding those in power accountable, regardless of the political cost. As the committee hearing came to a close, the lingering tension in the room was palpable. The battle had not been won through aggressive confrontation or high-volume speeches, but through the quiet, methodical application of truth. Representative Jasmine Crockett, with her unwavering focus on the facts, had shifted the dynamics of the entire room. She had exposed not just the contradictions in Chairman Jim Jordan's testimony, but the broader issue at play, the manipulation of truth for political gain. The room, which had once felt like a battleground for partisan warfare, now felt like a courtroom, where the truth, rather than the volume of voices, was the true victor. Crockett, though composed throughout the entire ordeal, felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't a feeling of triumph over her opponent. It was a deeper sense of purpose fulfilled. She had entered the hearing with one goal: to ensure that the truth was not buried beneath the weight of partisan loyalty and political gamesmanship. And as the session drew to a close, she knew she had done just that. The documents, the sworn testimonies, the court rulings, each piece of evidence she had presented had built a clear, undeniable case. But it wasn't just about presenting evidence. It was about making sure that those in power could no longer disregard the truth simply because it didn't fit their narrative. As Jordan, his usual confidence shattered, tried to salvage what was left of his authority, the committee members began to shift in their seats. Some exchanged glances, others scribbled notes, but all were keenly aware of the power that had just been demonstrated in the room. For the first time, the hearing had transcended the typical political game. The usual back and forth had been replaced with something more substantive, something rooted in facts, in precision, and in a commitment to transparency. The committee, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now seemed to breathe in a collective realization. Jordan's attempts to maintain control had faltered in the face of Crockett's calm but unwavering insistence on truth. His smirks, his rhetorical flourishes, his usual tactics, all of them had crumbled in the face of Crockett's factual accuracy. She had done what few others in the room had been willing or able to do. She had held the powerful accountable, not by attacking them personally, but by holding them to the standards of truth and integrity they so often sought to evade. For the committee members who had supported Jordan, the realization was a slow one. At first, they had been confident that their chairman would steer the hearing in their direction, but Crockett's precision had made them uneasy. They could no longer deny that the facts did not align with the narrative they had been trying to push. What had started as a partisan political hearing had slowly, imperceptibly, become something else. It had become a moment where the truth took center stage, where the pursuit of accuracy became more important than the desire for political victory. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone in the room that the rules had changed. The press, which had been ready to cover the typical spectacle of a political hearing, now found itself grappling with something much more complex. As the live broadcast continued, journalists and pundits alike struggled to grasp the true significance of the exchange. The typical soundbites and emotional clashes they had been prepared for had been replaced with a quiet, unflinching adherence to truth. Crockett's calm responses, her use of irrefutable evidence, and her refusal to be sidetracked by Jordan's attempts to derail the conversation had created a moment that could not be ignored or dismissed. The news clips, which were expected to be filled with the usual partisan bickering, were now filled with something else entirely: a message about the enduring power of truth and the dangers of manipulating it for political gain. Social media quickly picked up on the moment. The phrase, "the truth doesn't need your smirk," became a rallying cry for those who had grown disillusioned with the state of political discourse. What had started as a quiet exchange in a committee room had quickly turned into a viral moment, one that resonated with people from all walks of life. It wasn't just about the political figures involved, it was about something much more universal, the struggle for truth in a world increasingly dominated by partisan agendas. But for Crockett, the moment wasn't about viral fame or public accolades. It was about something far more important: the integrity of the process, the importance of holding those in power accountable, and the reminder that the truth was not something that could be ignored or manipulated. As the hearing drew to a close, she took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing ever so slightly. She knew that the fight for truth was far from over, but in this moment, she had done her part. She had shown the room that facts, no matter how inconvenient, could not be silenced. The aftermath of the hearing would have ripple effects far beyond the walls of the committee room. In the weeks that followed, the media would continue to cover the exchange, dissecting it from every angle. Political commentators, analysts, and even ordinary citizens would continue to debate its significance. But one thing was certain: the hearing had changed the way people viewed the power of truth in politics. It had reminded everyone that despite the noise, the smirks, and the distractions, the truth was still the most powerful force in the room. Crockett, in the days following the hearing, would receive countless messages of support from fellow lawmakers, from advocates for truth and justice, from ordinary citizens who had watched the hearing and been inspired by her unwavering commitment to facts. But perhaps the most gratifying moment came when one of her colleagues, a moderate member of the opposite party, approached her with a simple statement: "Thank you for reminding us what we're really here for. It's not about the headlines, it's about the truth." That moment, more than any soundbite or political endorsement, captured the essence of what Crockett had done. She had transcended the partisan divide, forcing even her political adversaries to recognize the importance of integrity and truth in the work they did. And as she continued her work in the months and years to come, she would carry with her the knowledge that, even in the most difficult of circumstances, the truth was something worth fighting for. The final moments of the hearing were almost anticlimactic after the storm that had preceded them. The committee room, once tense with partisan conflict, now seemed almost hollow. The sound of Jordan's closing remarks muffled beneath the weight of what had transpired. His attempt to regain control of the room, to wrap up the hearing with his signature deflections, was met with an almost palpable silence. It wasn't that the committee members had nothing to say. It was that they had seen something far more important than any political squabble: a lesson in integrity, a reaffirmation of the values they were sworn to protect. The room had not been conquered by forceful rhetoric or loud confrontation. It had been won by precision, by the quiet strength of Representative Jasmine Crockett, whose unwavering commitment to the truth had stripped away the layers of manipulation and half-truths that had been so expertly woven into the narrative. For a brief moment, there was a sense of stillness in the room as everyone processed what had just happened. It wasn't just about the facts that Crockett had so meticulously laid out. It was about how she had exposed the very foundations of the political games that had been played in that room, and in countless others just like it. By the time the hearing concluded, no one was talking about partisan divides or who had won the argument. They were talking about the importance of truth and the power that comes from standing firm in the face of adversity, no matter how daunting. As the hearing came to a close and the members began to file out of the room, Crockett remained seated for a moment longer, her gaze fixed ahead, her mind still processing the weight of what had just unfolded. It wasn't the satisfaction of victory that filled her, but the understanding that this moment would be far more significant than any soundbite or headline. It had been a quiet victory, one not for herself, but for the principles she held dear: the belief that the pursuit of truth must always come before political expediency, that facts must always be the foundation upon which decisions are made, and that no matter how powerful the forces aligned against you may seem, the truth is an unshakable pillar that cannot be toppled. In the days following the hearing, the story would continue to unfold, but it wouldn't unfold in the way the pundits had predicted. The story would not be about the clash of egos, the fiery exchanges, or the predictable partisan bickering. It would be about the quiet, unyielding force of truth, the power of one individual to take on the powerful structures of influence and shine a light on the manipulation of facts. And while the media would continue to cover the fallout, the lasting legacy of this moment would not be about who came out on top, but about how Representative Crockett had turned the hearing into a demonstration of the power of integrity in the face of political gamesmanship. As the news cycles churned and the media outlets dissected every minute of the hearing, something remarkable began to happen. The conversation that Crockett had ignited started to take on a life of its own. Her calm but powerful questioning resonated far beyond the walls of the committee room. It resonated with people who had long been tired of the political games, the empty rhetoric and the smirking dismissiveness that so often ruled the public discourse. It resonated with people who had watched as the truth had been sidelined for too long, as facts had been twisted to fit agendas, and as those in power had gotten away with manipulations without consequence. The truth that Crockett had so forcefully advocated for was now in the public consciousness. It wasn't just a political victory, it was a moral one. Social media, ever a barometer of public sentiment, quickly picked up on the key moments of the hearing. The phrase, "The truth doesn't need your smirk," began to spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a catchy soundbite, it was a rallying cry for anyone who had ever felt silenced by those in power, anyone who had ever had their truth dismissed or disregarded. The phrase became more than just a quote. It became a movement, a call for a return to integrity, to honesty, and to the pursuit of facts in an age when so much of the public conversation was dominated by falsehoods and distractions. But it wasn't just social media that took notice. Across the political spectrum, there was a shift in the way people began to view their leaders and their institutions. The more Crockett's words were analyzed, the more it became clear that her approach was not about tearing others down, but about holding them accountable with dignity and respect. It wasn't about winning for the sake of winning. It was about ensuring that the truth prevailed no matter what it cost. This was a message that transcended party lines, that reached beyond political affiliations, and that resonated with anyone who had ever felt marginalized or silenced. For Representative Crockett, the aftermath was both humbling and validating. Her office was flooded with messages of support, from colleagues, from constituents, from people across the country who had watched her stand firm in the face of immense pressure. But perhaps the most gratifying messages came from women who had faced similar challenges in their own careers. They had seen Crockett's calm, measured response to Jordan's attacks, and felt as though they were watching their own struggles unfold in real time. They had felt the sting of being dismissed, of having their expertise overlooked, and they had watched as Crockett turned that experience into a powerful reminder of the importance of standing up for the truth, no matter who tries to silence you. In the weeks and months that followed, the impact of that moment continued to reverberate. It wasn't just the media that took notice, it was the public. People began to demand more from their elected officials. They began to ask for accountability, for transparency, for the kind of leadership that wasn't afraid to confront difficult truths. The complacency that had once defined political discourse began to crumble, replaced by a renewed sense of urgency to ensure that facts remained at the center of the conversation. The truth, once obscured by the smirks and dismissive attitudes of those in power, had emerged from the shadows, and in doing so it had changed the course of the conversation, both in Washington and across the country. For Crockett, the path forward was clear. The battle for truth was far from over, but she now knew the power that lay in standing firm. She had proven once and for all that the truth was not something to be manipulated, to be swept aside, or to be ignored. It was something to be protected, to be fought for, and to be upheld, no matter the cost. And with that realization, she knew that she would continue to fight, not just for the truth but for the principles that made it worth fighting for.